Hello, my name is Laura McGloughlin and I'm a translator from Catalan and Spanish, and today I'm going to read a story from my translation of Bel Olid'S work Wilder Winds, which was published in January, and it's a collection of 16 short stories, all of which are tales of human connection within specific moments, or often specific moments of real adversity and conflict. This particular story, Baba Luba, it takes place in Ukraine, in Kiev, during the Ukrainian Revolution of 2014, and it's a story of one person who feels that they make a difference by doing one small gesture, which becomes much bigger than itself. Baba Luba. One of the moments of the day Luba Kashmir liked best was the time she spent lazing in the mornings before getting up. She usually woke around 7, but never got up before 8. She would allow her body to awaken little by little, stretch her toes, wiggle her ears, take time opening her eyes. She never closed her curtains, and if it wasn't winter, a friendly brightness filtered through the window. In front of the bed, Baba Luba had a heavy solid wood shelf that had been in the dining room years before. She had moved it into her room because on waking she liked to look at the 42 dolls her son had brought back for her over the years he'd worked as a sailor on whatever ship might want to take him. They were cheap dolls in poor taste, adorned with the traditional costumes of remote countries. Those dolls kept Baba Luba company, which is why she had asked the boy on the second floor and his friend to bring the shelf into her room. On opening her eyes in the morning, she looked at them and a flush would rise to her cheeks. She never got up before 8, but never later than past, and in a nightshirt and thick shawl she would go to the kitchen and prepare a cup of watery coffee, take a pickled cucumber from the glass jar, and spread butter on a slice of bread. She would listen to the radio in the morning, Baba Luba, while she rinsed the dishes from breakfast, washed her armpits with cold water, put her hair up in a bun and got dressed. They hadn't always called her Baba Luba in the district. The neighbours used to call her Lubishka as a little girl. Luba the Beauty, the boys would call her before she married. For a few years, before becoming a mother, she was simply Luba. But she was so old that by now there was no one who remembered a time when she wasn't Baba Luba. No grandchildren, but still Baba Luba, because such an old woman simply must call herself Granny. She lived alone and contented, cradled in her daily routine. If she thought about it, it would seem strange, that daily routine. She'd lived through a lot, Baba Luba. Changes of regime, laws, currency, inflation, poverty upon poverty. She had lived through a lot, and it could feel as if life never repeated itself at all. Rather, every few years, everything just turned upside down. But for a long time now, since Tara's death, when the double bed felt empty and she no longer had to get up with her husband to prepare his breakfast, she would repeat almost the same exact actions every day, finding a kind of steadying homeland in this repetition. Life had taught her that stability wasn't to be found outside on the streets, that as soon as you get used to how others live, everything changes. Daily actions, the simpler the better, were easier to maintain, and she lived contentedly, if not happily, following her little rituals. Waking up little by little, looking at her dolls, breakfasting on whatever was there, coffee with a slice of bread if there was any, listening to the radio while she rinsed the dishes and washed herself, obstinately going over the map of her small homeland formed of attainable habits. After lunch on that icy winter day, Baba Luba went downstairs to see her neighbour for a while. It was Saturday, and her neighbour had her granddaughter there. The girl had switched on the television, the volume low so they wouldn't be disturbed by the voice raised in anger. The speaker was talking about the protests in Independence Square, people of all ages coming out, the government that would have to give in sooner or later. President Yanukovych was on the television, pleading for calm, praising the work of the Berkut, asking for common sense from the good citizens. Be sensible. Don't leave your homes. The neighbour's granddaughter pulled up her sweater and showed them her back. It was a landscape of blues and reds, of tense, injured, inflamed skin. She pointed at the table, where there was a foreign newspaper open on the international section. It was them, and I was lucky. They say there were deaths. In the photograph was a row of men in helmets, with shields, body armour, and steely gazes. A row of seemingly unmoving men, not even a centimetre, truncheons in their hands, weapons at their waists, and people screaming, raising their hands, and that was what had happened in the square. They should hang their heads in shame, those scoundrels in uniform. "Child, get dressed. Don't get cold. The stove doesn't work well," said her neighbour as she handed her granddaughter some sweets that were just like the ones she liked to eat when she was a little girl. Baba Luba was uneasy in her chair and looked away from the newspaper and informed them that it was time for her to go home. There was only one floor between her neighbours on the third to her home on the fourth, but the images of the injured back, the president in a suit and tie, the police with gazes so hard they didn't seem human, were etched onto her retinas. The images were carved into her mind and weighed so heavily on her that it was difficult to make her way upstairs. She didn't sleep well the following nights, Baba Luba. Like every day, she repeated her actions, looked at her dolls, made herself coffee and rinsed the dishes, but she didn't find the comfort in them she had found before. The images came back to her and she was expelled from her little daily homeland. She wasn't cradled by the tranquility of her routine. As she washed before the mirror, she was surprised by her sad face, swollen eyelids, the turned-down corners of her mouth, the perfect bun that no longer contributed to the serenity she'd grown fond of over the years. "This is what I've become, a sad old woman." The words echoed against the tiled walls of the bathroom. Then the silence became more present than ever, and all the accumulated solitude fell on her as if no longer her friend. She was there for a long time, Baba Luba, looking at herself in the mirror, until she decided to take it down. It was a cheap mirror, 40 centimetres by 50, which the boy on the second floor and his friend had hung when the one she'd had all her life had chipped. It was fixed to the wall with a couple of hooks, and it wasn't too hard for her to remove it. Going down the 4 floors weighed down with a mirror and walking the 20 minutes to Independence Square, encumbered by her overcoat and gloves, was another thing altogether. Despite the cold, she reached the square with her cheeks burning. There was a crowd, and it seemed very young. Determined, she turned to the line of policemen, the multitude opening like a stupefied sea to allow through the old lady lugging a mirror under her arm. Reaching the end, before the impassive barrier of the bucket, she raised the mirror and turned it so the policeman could see himself, his clenched teeth, his eyes of steel. The policeman's blank stare focused on the reflection. His expression changed for a moment, and he made as if to say something. "This is what you've become, son," said Baba Luba. And then an elbow from a colleague called the policeman to order. Once again the blank stare, once again the return to the anonymity of the row. Someone started clapping beside Baba Luba, and the clapping extended throughout the square. People clapped their hands through thick gloves and waves of curiosity, not knowing why they were clapping. There was only the feeling that something worthy of clapping for had happened, and they felt the warmth pass from one to the other. She came home alone that day, Baba Luba. Slowly, with the fatigue of the years weighing on her, sitting down on some corner or other from time to time in order to gather strength. She looked at herself then and saw her white hair under a crimson scarf, her shining eyes, her happiness. "I'm not a sad old woman," she said to herself proudly. And so, thanks to an out-of-the-ordinary act, she recovered her little homeland of repeated action, of looking at her dolls, coffee and bread, radio, dishes to rinse. The following Saturday, at her neighbour's house, she met the granddaughter, the television on low, a foreign newspaper on the table. She had a cut across her cheek, the granddaughter, but she seemed happy. People have started to bring mirrors to the protests. The granddaughter showed them a picture of a group of demonstrators before the Burkut, showing them their hard faces reflected in mirrors of all sizes, the blank stares of steel, looking to not look at themselves, looking to continue being what they were supposed to be without thinking much about it. No one will remember her, Luba Kushnir. No one will know that she was the first to carry the mirror that wanted to reflect humanity and not just hardness in Independence Square. But now, every time she washes herself after rinsing the dishes, she looks in it for a moment longer than necessary, Baba Luba, and feels companionship.